Welcome to our channel, where seemingly ordinary stories hide unexpected and inspiring twists. In today's video, you'll follow the dramatic journey of a young waiter. With just one bold move, correcting the math mistake of a wealthy investor, his entire life took a shocking turn. From a humble server to a key player in a billion-dollar contract. Packed with tension, humor, and a stunning transformation, this story will keep you hooked from start to finish. Stay tuned to see how one small moment can change someone's entire destiny. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our exciting and inspiring stories. That morning, the luxurious restaurant La Belle Lumière, right in the heart of New York City, glittered like a jewel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, rows of wine glasses stood ready, and plush red velvet chairs proudly awaited the arrival of powerful guests. For most, it was just another busy morning. But for Ethan, a young, slightly skinny waiter in a wrinkled white apron, it felt like going to battle. He slipped between tables, carefully dodging his co-worker's wine tray, forcing a polite smile, even though all he wanted was a sip of water. "Ethan, table 5 wants coffee? Move it," barked the manager. Ethan nodded frantically, rushing toward the espresso machine while muttering to himself, "It's just coffee, not gold. But fine, let's smile. Rich people always want to be treated like kings." What made that morning different was the group of sharply dressed men who walked in, not ordinary customers. These were top investors, the kind people whispered about. Men who could shift millions of dollars with a simple nod. They settled at the long window table, their diamond-studded watches flashing with every exaggerated gesture. Ethan was assigned to serve them. His heart raced. No waiter wanted to make mistakes in front of people who could get you fired with a snap of their fingers. As he poured water, Ethan overheard their conversation. One investor, a balding man with a beer belly bulging under his navy suit, scribbled numbers on a napkin while boasting. "See? That's a 25% profit in under 3 months. Who would say no to this deal?" Ethan glanced at the napkin, and instantly, alarm bells rang in his head. The math didn't add up. Instead of 25%, it was barely 2.5%. A mistake big enough to turn a billion-dollar deal into a billion-dollar joke. Ethan bit his lip, his heart pounding. Should I say something? I'm just a waiter. Why would they listen? Maybe I should stay quiet and act like I never saw it. But his eyes stayed glued to the paper, as though the numbers themselves were daring him to speak up. He remembered his father's words. Never be afraid to speak the truth, no matter who's listening. Numbers don't lie, but people often do. A bead of sweat slid down Ethan's temple. He took a deep breath. In the suffocating air of that glittering restaurant, where fake laughter echoed around him, the young waiter stood at a crossroads. Stay silent and safe, or speak up and risk humiliation. And with all the reckless courage of youth, Ethan decided, "Excuse me, sir." Ethan's voice trembled, so faint he wasn't even sure they heard him. But instantly the table went silent. Cold, sharp eyes locked onto him, the kind of eyes used to giving orders, not being interrupted. "What did you just say?" The balding man with the beer belly arched a brow, setting his pen down. His expression was the same as if he'd just spotted a fly in his wine glass. Ethan swallowed hard. "That's it, I'm done for," he thought. But once the words were out, there was no turning back. He inhaled deeply, summoning every ounce of courage. I think your math might be a little off, sir. If I'm not mistaken, instead of 25%, the number is actually 2.5%. The air thickened. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then bam! Loud laughter exploded from the other investors. One slapped the table, roaring, "Unbelievable! A waiter giving us a math lesson." Another sneered, "Kid, why don't you just refill the glasses instead of crunching numbers before we die of thirst?" Ethan's face burned crimson, his ears on fire. He wished he could vanish on the spot. But the balding man's face had darkened. He squinted at the napkin, snatched up his pen, and began scribbling again. His hand shook. Sweat trickled down his forehead. The table fell silent. The mocking smiles faded. 1 minute passed, 2. Then he dropped the pen, pale as chalk. "Damn it," he muttered. "The kids..." Right. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. The same investors who had just mocked Ethan now exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "How did he spot that so fast? None of us even noticed." Ethan stood frozen, his hands trembling around the tray, heart pounding like war drums. He didn't know if he had just signed his own death warrant or cracked open a door to something bigger. The silence at table 5 was so heavy that the clinking of silverware from other tables sounded like thunder. Ethan stood frozen, heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't know whether to apologize, walk away, or pretend nothing had happened. Then, a deep voice cut through the tension. The voice of the man seated at the head of the table, very different from the noisy crowd around him. Tall, sharp, with salt and pepper hair and a perfectly tailored grey suit. Everyone in the investment world knew him. Richard Campbell, one of Wall Street's coldest, most calculating sharks. Ethan didn't dare look directly, but he could feel the weight of every eye turning toward Richard. Richard tapped his fingers against the table, then gave a faint smile. Interesting. A waiter who spotted a mistake we all overlooked. What's your name, son? Ethan swallowed. Ethan, sir. Ethan, Richard repeated, as if rolling the name around in his head. Where did you study math? Just community college, sir. I didn't graduate, Ethan admitted, gripping his tray tightly. The table murmured. One man chuckled mockingly. Didn't even graduate college, but he thinks he can lecture us. Ridiculous, but Richard didn't laugh. He tilted his head, studying Ethan like a puzzle. Then, without warning, he pulled the napkin back and slid the pen toward him. Well then, Ethan, why don't you show us the exact number? Ethan froze. Alarm bells rang in his head. Don't do it. You'll make a fool of yourself. They'll throw you out! But at the same time, a stubborn flame ignited. If I'm right, this might be my only chance to prove myself. He set the tray down carefully, took the pen, and began writing. Every eye in the room seemed to lock onto each stroke of his hand. His fingers trembled slightly, but his mind was razor sharp. He rewrote the calculation, each number precise and clear. When he finished, he looked up, voice steady. The actual profit margin is only 2.47%. Nothing more. The silence shattered. Awkward coughs, uneasy shifting. The balding man's face turned scarlet. Richard arched an eyebrow, then chuckled softly. This time, a genuine laugh. Well done, Ethan, he said, clapping once. Looks like we found ourselves a free auditor. The table laughed, but it was no longer mocking. Every gaze was fixed on the young waiter, the one who had dared to break the silence and won. Ethan's knees shook, but inside, a fierce pride began to bloom. The moment Richard spoke, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The arrogant investors now looked at Ethan with a mix of curiosity and unease. The young waiter had become the center of attention, though he wished nothing more than to crawl under the table and disappear. From across the room, the restaurant manager nearly had a heart attack. He rushed over, plastering on a nervous smile. My apologies, gentlemen. Our staff sometimes gets talkative. I'll have him removed right away so he won't disturb your meeting. Ethan's stomach dropped. This was it, the end. He'd meddled in the business of wealthy men, and getting fired was inevitable. But Richard raised a hand, stopping the manager cold. No need, the boy just saved us from a mistake worth millions. How is that a disturbance? The manager froze, jaw dropping before snapping shut again, his face pale. The other investors mumbled in agreement, unwilling to contradict Richard. Richard turned back to Ethan, his eyes now glinting with amusement. Ethan, I want you to stay. Bring us water or coffee if you must. But more importantly, listen, and if you catch us making mistakes, speak up. Deal? The restaurant might as well have exploded. A no-name waiter being invited to sit at the table by one of Wall Street's biggest sharks, and not just serve, but contribute. Ethan was stunned into silence. His legs felt rooted to the floor, his mouth dry as dust. Yes, sir, he finally stammered, voice shaking like leaves in the wind. Richard nodded, motioning for another chair. Ethan sat down awkwardly, heart pounding in his chest. The eyes around the table stayed fixed on him, some annoyed, some curious, some dripping with disdain. But for Ethan, it all faded into the background. In that instant, he knew he had just crossed a threshold no one could have predicted, and as if fate had chosen him, this was only the beginning of a journey that would take him from a nameless waiter to the center of $1 billion deal. That evening, after his shift ended, Ethan returned home with his mind still spinning. His tiny apartment sat on the 4th floor of a rundown building, walls peeling, hallways smelling of cigarettes and takeout food. Yet for Ethan, it was his refuge, a place where he could finally breathe after hours of fake smiles and bowing to wealthy diners. He dropped onto a worn-out chair and opened his laptop. The screen lit up, revealing an Excel sheet full of numbers he'd been building for months. No one knew that beneath the apron of a waiter, Ethan harbored a burning passion for financial analysis. By day, he served tables. By night, he devoured old textbooks and free online courses. I was right, he muttered. There's no mistake. That man really was wrong. The thought of having proven himself in front of powerful men left Ethan buzzing, half terrified, half proud. His phone buzzed. A text from his only close friend, Mariah, a former classmate from community college now working as a librarian. The message was short. Tough shift? You sounded like you just dodged death when you called. Ethan chuckled and typed quickly. Not wrong. I almost got fired today, but I also almost got something big, Mariah called immediately. Her voice rang with equal parts worry and sarcasm. What did you do this time? If you keep mouthing off to customers, your manager's gonna hang your apron on the wall as a warning. Ethan told her everything. How he corrected the investor's math, the laughter, the tension, and how Richard Campbell had invited him to stay at the table. Mariah was silent for a moment, then burst out laughing. Ethan, do you realize you sound like a movie character? Some no-name waiter suddenly catching the eye of a billionaire. All you need is dramatic background music, and it's Hollywood. Ethan leaned back, eyes tracing the cracks on the ceiling. A strange feeling swelled inside him, as if the door to another world had just cracked open, and he was standing on the threshold. The only question was, did he have the courage to step through? The next day, Ethan returned to the restaurant with a heavy heart. He was sure the manager would call him into the office, scold him for hours, and hand him a termination notice. The whole night he had tossed and turned, thinking, was I too reckless? I should have kept my mouth shut and just done my job. But to his surprise, the opposite happened. As soon as he walked in, the kitchen staff and waiters eyed him with a mix of awe and envy. One coworker whispered, "Dude, rumor is you blew those investors' minds yesterday. Seriously, Ethan, you trying to become a legend in this place?" Ethan scratched his head, about to deny it when the manager appeared. His face was stiff, none of his usual ferocity. He swallowed hard and muttered, "Someone special wants to see you. He's waiting in the VIP room." Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. He followed the manager past the glittering dining area. The VIP door opened, and there sat Richard Campbell, arms crossed, as calm and commanding as if he owned the restaurant. "Good morning, Ethan," Richard said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly. Ethan swallowed. Good morning, sir." Richard smirked faintly, his sharp eyes gleaming. "I've been thinking about yesterday. A kid waiter pointing out a mistake that an entire table of investors missed. That's not something ordinary." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Ethan, how would you like to work for me? Not serving drinks, but real work. Analysis, calculations. I need eyes like yours. Honest, fearless." The words hit Ethan like thunder on a clear day. He had imagined 100 scenarios, being scolded, fired, banned from the restaurant, but never this, an outright offer from a Wall Street shark. "But I'm just a waiter," Ethan stammered. Richard's smirk widened. "Exactly. And yesterday, a waiter silenced a table full of millionaires. Do you think I care more about a college degree or about someone who can see the truth?" The air in the room felt frozen. Ethan could almost hear the creak of Destiny's door swinging open in front of him. Ethan sat frozen, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Part of him screamed, "Say yes! This is the chance of a lifetime." But another voice whispered, "You're just a broke waiter. What business do you have stepping into the world of sharks? What if you get swallowed whole?" Richard seemed to read the conflict in his eyes. He smirked and spoke slowly, his calm voice heavy with weight. "Ethan, I don't need another Harvard prodigy. I already have a dozen of those working for me. What I need is someone who dares to speak the truth when everyone else stays silent. Yesterday you did that, and that, my boy, is priceless." He pulled a sleek business card from his pocket and placed it on the table. Only one line of text, Richard Campbell, Campbell Capital. A direct cell number printed clearly, no secretary, no assistant. An invitation without barriers. "You don't have to answer right now," Richard said, tapping the card with his finger. "Think about it, but opportunities don't knock twice. I'll need your answer within 48 hours. Ethan stared at the card as if it were a golden key to another world. His chest rose and fell sharply, his heart racing. The opportunity was both sweet and terrifying, like a dragon spreading its massive wings. Richard stood, slipping on his jacket. With one final glance, he added, "Make the wise choice. Ethan, don't let fear trap you in a tiny room for the rest of your life." And with that, he left, the VIP room falling silent, leaving Ethan alone with a business card and 1,000 unanswered questions. That night, Ethan could barely sleep. He tossed and turned on his creaky bed, eyes fixed on the water-stained ceiling. On the nightstand, Richard's business card gleamed faintly under the dim light, like a ghost whispering endlessly, 48 hours. 48 hours. He sat up, flipped open his laptop, and pulled up the countless Excel files he had built over the years. Hundreds of spreadsheets, formulas, and charts he had taught himself. Since his mother's death, Ethan had worked as a waiter to support himself, but deep down he always believed he had a gift, the ability to see what others overlooked. Numbers never lied. His phone buzzed. Mariah was calling, her voice sleepy but curious. "You're still awake. Don't tell me you're crunching numbers again." Ethan chuckled and told her about Richard's offer. The business card, the 48-hour deadline. On the other end, Mariah was silent for a long moment before she burst into soft laughter. "Sounds like a movie. But Ethan, I know you. You're not afraid of hard work. You're afraid of failing. The real question is, do you want to keep pouring coffee forever? Or do you dare to step onto the table where the big players gamble?" Ethan froze. Her words cut straight to his heart. Yes, it was failure he feared most, the reason he'd settled into his dull job. But now, with opportunity knocking, could he ignore it? He glanced again at the business card. One call, and his life could veer in a completely different direction. He inhaled deeply, nerves buzzing with both fear and excitement. He knew that when the clock struck the 48-hour mark, the choice would no longer be hypothetical. That night, Ethan lay awake, haunted by a single question on repeat. Do I have the courage to walk through that door? The next morning, Ethan stepped onto the street with dark circles under his eyes. But inside he burned with a nervous excitement. He slipped Richard's business card into his shirt pocket, as if it were both a heavy burden and a sacred charm. He tried to head to work as usual, but every step dragged with the question, should I call him? At the restaurant, things felt different. Co-workers who once dismissed him now gave him odd, curious looks. One whispered, "Word is Campbell noticed you yesterday. You quitting the waiter life or what?" Ethan forced a smile, saying nothing. Inside, a new fear stirred. If I fail, they'll all laugh at me, call me the delusional waiter. While he was washing glasses, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Ethan's heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He wiped his hands on his apron, fumbling to answer. "Hello?" That deep, commanding voice came through the line. "Ethan, it's Richard Campbell." He almost dropped the glass in his hand. "Sir, you're calling me?" "Yes, I don't like waiting long. Yesterday I gave you 48 hours, but truthfully, I want your decision sooner. So tell me, Ethan, are you ready to set aside that waiter's apron and step into the real world?" Ethan's heart pounded wildly. He glanced around, catching his manager glaring at him for taking too long on the phone. But in that moment, everything faded. The only thing that mattered was Richard's question hanging heavy in the air. He swallowed hard, drew a deep breath. This was it. The moment his entire life could change with a single word. In that moment, Ethan felt as if the whole world had frozen. The clinking of silverware, the manager's nagging, the customers calling orders, all of it muted, leaving only the thunder of his heartbeat in his ears. Ethan's voice cracked. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. "I'll do it, sir." On the other end, Richard didn't respond right away. The silence stretched, dripping with tension, until Ethan was sweating like he was on trial. Then Richard chuckled softly. "Good, I despise hesitation. Right or wrong, a man must decide. Tonight, 8 o'clock. I'll send you the address. Don't be late. People can forgive a miscalculation, but never tardiness." The line went dead. Ethan stood frozen, still clutching a glass. The words, 8 o'clock tonight, pounding in his skull. He had just stepped into a game whose rules he didn't know. Mariah texted back after he told her, "Are you insane? But I believe in you. Show them you're more than a waiter." That afternoon, Ethan couldn't focus at work. He dropped spoons, spilled water, endured the manager's glare a dozen times. But none of it mattered. His mind was already elsewhere. On the meeting with Richard Campbell, the man feared across Wall Street. By 6 o'clock, Ethan begged to leave early. He changed into his cleanest shirt, old but neatly pressed. In the mirror, he saw a young man whose eyes glowed with equal parts fear and determination. And in his head, a single voice rang, "This isn't a restaurant shift anymore. This is the gamble of your life." At 8 o'clock sharp, Ethan stood before a towering glass skyscraper downtown. Neon lights shimmered on the pavement, making him feel like an outsider in this glittering world. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, heart pounding. The receptionist's demeanor shifted instantly when she saw Richard's business card. "Mr. Campbell is expecting you on the 40th floor," she said with respect. Ethan entered the elevator, and with each floor that ticked upward, his stomach knotted tighter. When the doors opened, he was greeted by a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the New York skyline at night. Richard sat there, relaxed behind a walnut desk, a glass of whiskey in hand, his sharp eyes both scrutinizing and inviting. "On time." "Good," Richard said, setting his glass down. "Sit, Ethan. Tonight I don't need a waiter. I need a working mind." Ethan sat on the leather chair, palms slick with sweat. On the desk lay a thick folder titled "Proposed Tech Merger, Preliminary Numbers." Richard slid it across the desk. "This merger is what Wall Street is buzzing about. My team spent 3 weeks preparing this draft. I want you to read it and tell me straight. If there's a wrong number, a flaw, anything that feels off, don't sugarcoat it." Ethan froze. He had never touched documents like these. Never imagined he'd be asked to review a deal worth billions. But Richard's gaze was a blade, pushing him to nod. He took a deep breath and flipped open the first page. Numbers filled the sheets, columns, ratios, forecasts. In his mind, a familiar voice whispered, "Numbers don't lie. Look closely. Don't be afraid." His finger traced down the spreadsheets, and within minutes, his eyes lit up. Something was wrong. A simple addition had been twisted to inflate profits threefold. A mistake, or a deliberate deception? Ethan looked up, his heart pounding like a drum, ready to speak words that could change his destiny forever. Ethan drew a deep breath, his finger resting on the bold line of numbers. He looked up, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Mr. Campbell, something's wrong here." Richard raised an eyebrow, half curious, half testing. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Go on." Ethan swallowed and pointed at the profit forecast. "This section says post-merger net profits triple, but if you add the base numbers, it's barely a 15% increase. I think someone deliberately inflated this, or at best, made a serious mistake." The room fell silent. City lights spilled in, casting Ethan's shadow tall against the wall, like a lone warrior in a massive arena. Richard slowly pulled the folder toward him, eyes scanning the numbers Ethan had marked. After a pause, he let out a short laugh, a sound that cracked like thunder inside Ethan's chest. "You're right, and my team is wrong." He slammed the folder down, rattling the whiskey glass. 3 weeks of work, dozens of analysts, and they all missed what a waiter spotted in minutes. Richard's gaze returned to Ethan, but now it carried respect instead of challenge. "Ethan, you've just proven you're not some lucky outsider. You have something money can't buy, eyes unclouded by ambition." Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. This wasn't a restaurant drama anymore. This was his first step into the whirlpool of billion-dollar deals, where the smallest mistake could topple empires. Richard rose and extended his hand. "Welcome, Ethan. From this moment on, you're no longer a waiter. You're part of Campbell Capital." Ethan hesitated for a beat, then placed his hand in Richard's. It felt like signing an invisible contract with destiny itself. On his first day at Campbell Capital headquarters, Ethan felt like he had stepped into another universe. The towering skyscraper gleamed with its shining logo. Employees in tailored suits rushed past, clutching laptops and phones, every stride carrying the weight of decisions that could shake global markets. Ethan wore a second-hand suit, slightly loose at the shoulders and creased at the sleeves. As he entered the elevator, he caught a few employees giving him side glances, then smirking. "They probably think I'm just a waiter out of place," he thought, but he kept his chin high and walked straight ahead. Richard himself appeared on the top floor, giving Ethan a tour. He pointed out the main conference room, the data analysis wing, the trading floor buzzing with a forest of monitors. Each space hummed with the rhythm of clicking keyboards and tense voices negotiating millions. "Welcome to the arena, Ethan," Richard said, half joking, half serious. "Here, we don't serve coffee to guests. We serve the truth to the market. And the market is far crueler than any customer you've ever met." Ethan forced a nervous smile, but his eyes lit up. He could feel he was crossing a threshold that most people only dreamed of. Fear coursed through him, but so did a fierce excitement. By mid-morning, Richard tossed him a test. A thick report on a rising tech company. "This is a project we're considering investing in. I want you to tell me if we should put money in or walk away. You have 3 hours. 3 hours? Ethan's eyes widened. The stack of charts, financials, and forecasts looked like something that would take a team of analysts a week to dissect. But Richard only smirked, as if to say, "Show me why I chose you." Ethan sat down, drew a deep breath. His pencil trembled slightly in his hand, but his eyes blazed with determination. "All right, if I dared to step in, then I'll play the whole game." Ethan sat down at the temporary desk Richard had assigned him, right next to the analyst bullpen. Around him, dozens of professionals in suits hammered away at keyboards, their screens glowing with charts and numbers. None of them looked directly at him, but Ethan could feel the sideways smirks, the mocking eyes saying, "Let's see how the waiter handles this." A blonde woman in clicking heels stopped by his desk, raising a brow. "Another one of the boss's little experiments? Poor guy. Hope you don't cry when you see the balance sheet." Ethan flushed but said nothing. Instead, he opened the file. Numbers sprawled across the pages. Revenue, costs, profit forecasts, projections, like a jungle of figures meant to swallow outsiders whole. Time raced by. 1 hour? Then 2. Sweat dripped onto the paper. But Ethan's eyes only grew sharper. He spotted R&D expenses, listed far below industry averages. A clear trick to make the company look healthier than it was. He underlined it, scribbling notes. Then he noticed secondary revenue streams folded into the main line, another ploy to inflate profit margins. At the 170-minute mark, Ethan dropped his pencil. His 3 hours were nearly up. Before him lay a stack of pages filled with red marks, annotations, and sharp observations. He exhaled, lifting his head, only to see several analysts pretending to work, but clearly eavesdropping. A few even sneaking glances at his papers. A slick-haired man in a blood-red tie smirked. "Amusing. The waiter thinks he's found errors our entire department missed. Fine. Let's see how Richard reacts when he hears this." Ethan swallowed, but his eyes no longer wavered. He knew the moment of truth was coming. The conference room door swung open. Richard strode in, followed by 3 seasoned team leaders. Everyone stood at once, the tension thick enough to choke on. Ethan clutched his marked-up pages, his heart hammering. "It's time," Richard said curtly, scanning the room before fixing his eyes on Ethan. "Well then, my waiter, tell me, is this company worth Campbell Capital's money?" The room went dead silent. Ethan drew a deep breath, then laid his papers on the table. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier with each word. "Sir, this report has several discrepancies. R&D expenses are understated, secondary revenues are incorrectly lumped into main income, and growth rates are inflated. Based on this report, it looks like profits triple. But in reality, it's barely over 10%. A ripple of murmurs swept the room. Some analysts raised their brows, others smirked. One of the team leaders folded his arms, voice sharp as a knife. "Do you have any idea how many weeks my team spent on that report? And you, a kid without a degree, dare claim we're wrong?" Ethan's fists clenched, but he stood his ground. "I don't mean disrespect. I just believe. Numbers don't lie." Richard burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the room like a clap of thunder. He slammed the table with delight. "Brilliant, Ethan. Exactly right. You saw what my entire team overlooked. And that is why you're here." The room went still. The team leader flushed red and lowered his gaze. The mocking smiles vanished, replaced by wary, calculating stares. Richard turned on his analysts, his voice slicing like steel. "You've got degrees and years of experience. Yet a waiter exposed your mistakes in front of me. Embarrassing, isn't it?" Then he faced Ethan again, eyes gleaming with intrigue. "From now on, you're not just the quick math kid. You're someone I will personally train." Ethan's heart thundered in his chest. A new path, treacherous yet blazing with possibility, had just opened wide before him. As the meeting ended, people filed out of the room. Richard shook Ethan's hand in front of everyone, his expression carrying rare approval. "Well done. This is just the beginning, Ethan. Get ready. I'll be giving you more work from now on." Ethan nodded, trying to look calm, though his heart raced. Out in the hallway, he felt the shift immediately. The eyes on him were no longer merely curious. They were sharp, cold, some filled with envy, others with disdain, and a few with quiet hostility. The man with the blood-red tie suddenly leaned close, whispering with a mocking sneer, "Don't think a pat on the back means you've won. Around here, the game isn't just about numbers." "Watch yourself, waiter," Ethan stiffened, shoulders tight, but said nothing. Deep inside, He knew the truth. This path wouldn't be easy. Richard wasn't the only one watching. He had just stepped into a den of wolves. Back at his desk, Ethan opened his laptop, eyes on the endless rows of figures. Beyond the glass windows, the city lights glimmered like a vast universe. He took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Fine. If I've been thrown into a pack of wolves, I'll learn to roar like a lion." In that moment, Ethan understood he had entered a power game where opportunity and danger walked hand in hand, and the first chapter of his new life had just closed with a challenge. A week later, Ethan was officially handed his first real deal. No more observing, no more practice assignments. This time, he would join the analyst team preparing a report for a foreign investment fund. The deal was worth $500 million, funding a rising renewable energy company. That morning, Ethan sat in the grand conference room surrounded by cold, professional faces. Charts, forecasts, and complex numbers glowed on the projector. Richard sat at the head of the table, eyes sharp, chin nodding slightly in Ethan's direction. "Ethan," Richard began, "I want you to handle the risk analysis. You have 48 hours to comb through all the data and find any weaknesses. If you fail, we lose hundreds of millions. If you succeed, we win big." The room stiffened. A few analysts stared at Ethan as if Richard had just handed a live grenade to the rookie waiter. The man with the blood-red tie smirked, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, perfect. $500 million in the hands of the guy who used to pour water at La Belle Lumiere." Soft chuckles rippled around the table. Ethan flushed, but this time he didn't bow his head. He flipped open his laptop, his voice firm. "Then I'll prove to you all that even a waiter can do what the experts miss." Richard's lips curved into a grin, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Good. Then let's begin." As the team bent over their screens, Ethan felt the weight settle on his shoulders. This wasn't a test anymore. It was the real game. One mistake, and the blame would fall squarely on him. But if he succeeded, his name would echo across Campbell Capital. He drew a long breath, fingers trembling on the keyboard. "All right," he told himself. "Game on." Ethan buried himself in work for hours. Reports thick with numbers sprawled across his desk, his laptop glowing with dozens of spreadsheet tabs. Around him, co-workers stole glances, a few whispering with smirks, as if waiting for him to collapse. Just as Richard had warned, the data was dizzyingly complex. But to Ethan, every number sparked in his mind like puzzle pieces clicking into place. First, he noticed the renewable energy company's operating costs had steadily risen each quarter. Yet the report claimed profit margins also kept rising steadily. Impossible. If costs rise, margins should at least fluctuate, not run flat like a ruler. He paused, double-checked the base figures. Then he saw it, a clever trick. The company's accountants had shifted part of the expenses into the research investment category, making the financial statements look cleaner, while hiding the fact that profits were actually being eaten away. Twice as much as reported. Ethan drew a bold red line, jotting down, "Profit inflated, hidden expenses." At that moment, the man with the blood-red tie strolled past, glancing at Ethan's notes with a smirk. "Don't get too excited, kid. We've read hundreds of these reports. You're just wasting your time." Ethan didn't look up, replying in a calm, steady tone. "Maybe you're right, but sometimes reading too many reports blinds you to what's obvious." The man froze for a beat, then sneered and walked off. Ethan kept working, sweat on his brow but eyes glowing brighter. He knew he was closing in on something critical, a piece of the puzzle that could change the fate of this $500 million deal. That night, Ethan remained at the office long after most employees had gone. The city outside glittered with lights, while inside only the sound of typing and his scribbling pen filled the silence. He was exhausted, but an odd surge of excitement kept him going. And then he saw it. A supplemental table buried near the back of the report, labeled Miscellaneous Subsidiary Contracts. Ethan frowned, flipping the pages back and forth, then froze. In the additional revenue line, the renewable energy company had listed profits from the very subsidiary they were about to merge with. "Oh my God," Ethan whispered. "They're double counting their own money." It meant the reported growth was massively inflated. Nearly a third of the projected profits were nothing but accounting smoke and mirrors. If the deal went through, the fund would pay hundreds of millions for phantom earnings. Ethan's chest tightened, his hands trembling. This was the Golden evidence. The kind of discovery that could collapse a $500 million deal or save Campbell Capital from a catastrophic mistake. Just then, the office door creaked open. Richard stepped in, jacket slung over his shoulder, eyes glinting as he spotted Ethan still working. His lips curved into a sly smile. "Still here? Or did you just find something my entire team missed?" Ethan looked up, holding out his heavily marked pages, voice tense but steady. "Mr. Campbell, I think I just found the reason this deal can't go forward. This isn't a small mistake. It's an accounting con." The room fell silent. Richard strode closer, eyes narrowing on the paper in Ethan's hands. A half smile tugged at his lips, dangerous but filled with delight. "Excellent, Ethan. Now let's find out who thought they could play tricks on Campbell Capital." 2 days later, Campbell Capital's boardroom was lit like a battlefield. Around the long oak table sat 2 sides, Richard's team on one end, the renewable energy company's representatives, flanked by lawyers and financial advisors, on the other. The air reeked of power, money, and deceit. Ethan sat at the far end, fingers tightly interlocked. His heart pounded, caught between fear and thrill. This wasn't an office exercise anymore. It was a real war, where numbers became weapons. Richard began with his usual calm authority. He flipped through a few pages, eyes sweeping the table, voice smooth but heavy. "Your report is impressive, but I've noticed a few details that need clarification." He paused, holding up the appendix Ethan had uncovered. Richard's eyes glinted like blades. "It seems you've double-counted profits from your own subsidiary. A miraculous accounting trick? Or an attempt to swindle us out of hundreds of millions?" The room went still. The opposing team exchanged nervous glances, sweat breaking across foreheads. One lawyer stammered, "Surely that's just a mistake." Richard laughed, the sound booming across the room. "A mistake? A mistake that coincidentally inflated profits by 1/3. Do you think Campbell Capital is run by fools?" He slammed the folder shut, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "This deal is over, and I'll make sure Wall Street knows exactly who tried to sell smoke and mirrors." The other side paled. Some tried to force smiles, but fear was etched across their faces. Richard stood, motioning his team to leave. Before walking out, he cast a brief glance at Ethan. Ethan sat frozen, his heartbeat drumming like war thunder. He could hardly believe that his red ink notes had just detonated a bomb in the middle of high-stakes negotiations. In that instant, he knew he was no longer an outsider. Richard walked over, laid a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice low enough for only him to hear. "Well done, kid. You just saved us $500 million and made a few men sweat." Ethan inhaled sharply. Pride swelled inside him, but so did a chill. He realized this game was far more ruthless than he had ever imagined. News of the collapsed negotiations swept through Wall Street faster than a winter gust. By the next morning, financial headlines screamed, "Campbell Capital exposes $500 million accounting fraud. Richard Campbell escapes investment trap. Thanks to stunning discovery." Buried in many of those stories was a tantalizing detail. An internal source revealed that a new employee played a crucial role in uncovering the scheme. No one knew the name of the former waiter turned analyst, but everyone at Campbell Capital did. When Ethan walked into the office that morning, every gaze locked onto him. Some filled with surprise, some with disdain, but others with a flicker of respect. The man in the blood-red tie brushed past, muttering with a smirk, "Impressive, kid. But climb too fast, and the fall hurts more." Ethan pressed his lips together, staying silent. He knew it was part insult, part warning. Just then, the desk phone rang. A secretary's voice came through. "Ethan, Mr. Campbell would like to see you in his office, immediately." His heart raced again. He stepped into Richard's luxurious office, where the man stood at the window, gazing over Manhattan. Richard turned, a faint smile curling his lips. "Congratulations, Ethan. Wall Street is buzzing about us. And I know one thing for certain. You're the one who made this happen." He stepped closer, hand on Ethan's shoulder. "But remember, your first victory just means everyone's watching you now. And I want you prepared, because the real game is only just beginning." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew the spotlight he had earned came with a price. He had officially stepped into the eye of the storm. In the days that followed, Ethan became the center of gossip across the firm. Everywhere he went, whispers followed, "That's the waiter Campbell handpicked." Let's see how long his luck lasts. Bet he'll burn out fast. Some colleagues suddenly turned friendly, bringing coffee to his desk or striking up conversations. But Ethan wasn't naive. He knew those smiles hid curiosity and probing. Others openly froze him out, refusing to share documents or include him in discussions. The sharpest hostility came from the man in the red tie, Marcus, a veteran team leader. During a team meeting, Marcus aimed his words like knives. We can't rely on someone with no experience. If mistakes happen, Campbell Capital's reputation is on the line. I suggest Ethan stick to observing, not meddling. Silence gripped the room. Ethan bit his lip, fury boiling inside. But before he could answer, the door swung open. Richard entered, his voice cold as steel. Marcus, if I wanted someone to observe, I'd install a camera, not hire people. Ethan is here to work, and if he finds another mistake you overlooked, I'll have to ask who really deserves to stay at this table. The air thickened. Marcus's face drained of colour, though he forced a weak smile and nodded stiffly. Ethan sat there, feeling both protected and shoved deeper into the fire. After the meeting, Mariah called to check on him. Ethan chuckled bitterly. You know, I feel like a glowing coal in a furnace. Everyone either wants to blow me out or use me for their own warmth. I just have to figure out how not to burn away. On the other end, Mariah's voice was steady. Then become the fire itself, Ethan. Grow so big they can't smother you. Ethan said nothing. But in his eyes, a spark of resolve flared bright. One drizzly afternoon, Richard called the analysis team into a private meeting. The tension was palpable even before it began. On the table lay a thick folder stamped with the logo of an infamous international finance giant. Davenport & Co. Marcus's face blanched at the sight of the name. He shot wary looks at his colleagues, then shook his head slightly, as if warning them. This was dangerous ground. Richard wasted no time. His voice was sharp as a blade. Davenport & Co. has invited us to co-invest in an African infrastructure project. The numbers are massive, and so are the risks. I want my people to dig deep. Ethan, this one's yours. The room froze. Marcus frowned, blurting out, Mr. Campbell, with all due respect, this isn't the kind of file for someone green. Davenport is notorious for murky deals and traps. Letting a kid handle it could cost us dearly. Richard glanced at Marcus, a faint, cutting smile on his lips. Exactly, because you and the rest of the department are too timid to touch it. That's why I'm giving it to Ethan. I don't need comfort. I need the truth. His gaze locked onto Ethan. You have 72 hours. Tear this file apart. Find what Davenport is hiding. Do that, and you'll no longer be just the new guy. Ethan's stomach twisted into knots. 72 hours. A notorious firm with a reputation for traps. A task even veterans like Marcus avoided. But deep in his chest, a fire flared. This was the chance to prove he wasn't just a lucky accident. Marcus smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. Good luck, kid. You'll need it more than skill. Ethan clutched the folder, his hands trembling slightly, but in his eyes burned determination. Fine. If they want to test me with fire, then I'll walk straight into the flames. That night, one corner of Campbell Capital's office still glowed, the place where Ethan was buried in Davenport & Co.'s thick file. The pages reeked of ink, numbers tangled like a labyrinth. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, inhaled deeply and began his journey. At first, everything looked almost too perfect. Steady growth, consistent profits, charts polished to a shine, as if staged for a show. But the deeper Ethan read, the more his instincts prickled. He flipped to the section on infrastructure costs in West Africa. A massive figure stood out, vaguely labelled supplementary logistics expenses. Ethan frowned. Supplementary logistics? For a 200-kilometre highway project that should have been broken down in detail. Digging further, he found something stranger. The exact same expense appeared twice, in two different tables, under two different names. Together, the numbers had been quietly doubled. Ethan scrawled in red, duplicate costs, deliberate inflation. The night dragged on, his eyes bloodshot. Then, around 2 a.m., he stumbled on something that made his pulse spike. A side contract naming a satellite company registered in the Cayman Islands. This shell company had almost no operations, yet it had been paid tens of millions for consulting services. Ethan dropped into his chair, heart hammering. This wasn't ordinary misreporting. This was a red flag for money laundering, or worse, a siphoning scheme to gut investors. He whispered, "My God, Davenport isn't just hiding flaws. They're staging an entire play. In that moment, Ethan realized this assignment wasn't just a personal test. It was a live bomb in the financial world, and he was holding the detonator. The next morning, Ethan walked into Richard's office, carrying a folder marked with red notes. He looked worn from a sleepless night, shirt wrinkled and eyes shadowed, but his gaze burned with determination. Richard sat behind his desk, signing papers, glancing up briefly. "What do you have for me?" Ethan set the folder down, inhaling deeply. "Mr. Campbell, Davenport & Co.'s isn't just sloppy. This is systematic fraud. They inflated logistics costs, double-counted figures, and worst of all, they created a shell company in the Cayman Islands to siphon investor money." The room grew heavy. Richard's pen froze mid-air. He looked up, locking eyes with Ethan in silence that stretched like an eternity. Then, a low laugh rolled out, deep, resonant. "Do you realize what you've uncovered, Ethan? This isn't just a bad deal. This is a kill shot against one of the most powerful finance houses in the world." He rose, stepped around the desk, and laid a hand on Ethan's shoulder. His eyes blazed. "And you found it in 72 hours. My analysts wouldn't touch it, but you did. You've got guts, and you've got the eyes I need." Ethan swallowed hard, pride mingling with dread. He knew Richard's words weren't just praise. They were also a warning. He had officially stepped into a dangerous game where powerful players wouldn't hesitate to bury the truth. Richard returned to his desk, lifted the phone, his voice hard as steel. "Set up the meeting. We're going to show Davenport that Campbell Capital doesn't get played, and I want Ethan sitting right beside me." Ethan stood there, drawing a sharp breath. One thought thundered in his mind. "I've walked into the storm now. There's no turning back." The Campbell Capital boardroom was packed that day. On Davenport & Co.'s side sat three heavyweights: a silver-haired man with slicked back hair, a sharp-suited woman in black, and a young lawyer with an icy stare. The air was so tense it felt like the smallest spark could set off an explosion. Ethan sat beside Richard, gripping his annotated file. He could feel the Davenport team's eyes on him, probing, dismissive, laced with veiled threats. Richard opened, his tone calm but cutting. "We're here to be direct. Your report has some interesting features, and I don't like magic tricks with numbers." The silver-haired man smirked. "Mr. Campbell, perhaps your employee misunderstood. We have no reason to conceal anything." Richard's gaze slid to Ethan, signaling, "Your turn." Ethan's heart pounded, but he drew a deep breath, pulling out his notes. His voice rang steady, each word sharp as a blade. "In the appendix, under supplementary logistics expenses, you list $84 million, but the exact same item appears again in operating costs, under a different label, also $84 million, meaning the figure has been doubled." The room froze. Ethan flipped another page. "And here, Consulting Horizon Limited, registered in the Cayman Islands. Public records show it has no office, no staff, yet you've paid it $62 million. Why?" The woman in black blinked, then smiled thinly. "Young man, you're bold, but perhaps you don't understand. These practices are industry standard. If you nitpick every detail, no deal in this world would ever close." Richard chuckled, his laugh dry and scathing. "Industry standard? If outright theft of hundreds of millions is a standard, then Wall Street is overdue for a purge." He snapped the folder shut with a crack, his eyes locking on Davenport's delegation. "Your game ends here." Ethan watched, a rush of adrenaline mixed with dread. He realized this wasn't just a meeting. It was a clash of sharks, and for the first time, he had dared to bare his teeth in an ocean of blood. Right after the meeting, the air at Campbell Capital felt like a storm was brewing. Richard walked out with his usual calm, but Ethan caught the flicker of caution in his eyes. Davenport & Co. wasn't the type to swallow humiliation quietly. Sure enough, within a day, vague headlines began popping up. Insider sources: Campbell Capital relied on inexperienced staff to break deal. Or, was a waiter boy behind Richard Campbell's decision? Ethan held the newspaper, hands trembling slightly. Mariah called instantly. "Ethan, do you see? They're turning you into a joke. This is their counterattack. They're trying to kill your credibility before you can even stand tall." That evening, leaving the office, Ethan felt eyes on him. Footsteps echoed behind him down a lonely street. He spun around, nothing, just thick shadows under the sickly glow of street lamps. The next day, Ethan's company email received an anonymous message. You have no idea what you're poking at. Leave Campbell before it's too late. Ethan sat frozen, palms cold with sweat. He now understood. Exposing Davenport wasn't just work. It was a direct punch at a power willing to crush anyone in its way. In an internal meeting, Richard scanned the room before fixing his gaze on Ethan, his voice low and heavy. We've stepped on the tail of a serpent. And Ethan, you're the first it will hunt. But remember, venomous snakes can kill, but they can also be crushed. If you don't fear them. Ethan nodded, throat dry. Fear clawed at him, raw and primal, but at the same time, fire surged in his chest. If Davenport wanted him as a target, he wouldn't run. He would fight. On Monday morning, as Ethan entered the Campbell Capitol building, the receptionist gave him a strange look. On the counter lay a financial paper blazing a headline, Campbell's rising star in education scandal. Fake credentials. Ethan froze. He snatched up the paper. Inside was a full-page article accusing him of never graduating college, even insinuating he had falsified his resume to land a spot at Campbell. It quoted anonymous sources claiming he'd been fired from the restaurant for stealing tips. His head spun. Every word was a lie, but written with absolute confidence, backed by fuzzy documents, convincing enough for the public. In the elevator, a few employees whispered, See? Told you, just hype. If Richard keeps that kid around, the firm will be a laughingstock. Ethan bit down hard, humiliation burning his throat. When he entered the office, Richard was already there holding the same paper. He tossed it on the table, his voice dry as sandpaper. Davenport struck back. They're painting you as a fraud, so every discovery you've made becomes worthless. Ethan's voice trembled. But none of it's true. I never. Richard cut him off with a sharp wave. I know, but on Wall Street, truth matters less than what people believe. So Ethan, this is your defining moment. Either you let them bury you, or you prove to the world you're not just clean, but stronger than every lie they throw. Ethan clenched his fists. The storm had broken over his head, but instead of fear, fire surged inside. He wouldn't let Davenport define who he was. A vow burned in his chest. If they try to bury me in mud, I'll rise from it and walk right over them. Davenport's media attack made Ethan the hottest name on Wall Street. Tabloids and financial outlets alike piled on, the waiter who calls himself a prodigy. Campbell's rising star has a shady past. The more articles surfaced, the weaker Ethan's position seemed. But instead of hiding, he chose to fight back. That night, Ethan sat in his small apartment with Mariah, the only person he still trusted. Surrounded by messy stacks of papers, he slammed his hand on the table. Fine. They want to smear me with lies? Then I'll hit back with the truth. Mariah frowned. But how? They've got media, power, money to buy public opinion. And you've got a beat-up laptop. Ethan smiled, weary but resolute. I've got numbers, and numbers don't lie. The plan took shape. Ethan began compiling all the evidence of Davenport's fraud. Duplicated expenses, the Cayman Shell Company, the bogus contracts. He reached out to an independent journalist with a reputation for integrity, someone who had once gone toe-to-toe with corporate giants. The next day, Ethan and Richard stepped into a surprise press conference. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing wildly. Everyone expected Campbell Capital to explain away its fraudulent waiter analyst. Instead, Richard stepped aside, giving the podium to Ethan. Ethan drew a deep breath, staring into the sea of lenses. His voice rang out steady and strong. They say I'm a fraud, but the truth is, Davenport & Co. are the frauds. Here's the evidence. He held up the file, each page projected on a massive screen. Duplicate costs, shady cash flows into a shell company, bogus contracts. The room erupted with gasps. Reporters shot to their feet, snapping photos, live streaming instantly. Ethan ended with a thunderclap. I used to be a waiter. I know what it's like to be looked down on. But today, I'm not here to defend my name. I'm here to defend the truth. For a moment, the room was dead silent, before the storm broke with flashes, applause, and reporters shouting questions like thunder. Within hours of the press conference, social media exploded. Clips of Ethan holding the folder, his voice cutting like steel, went viral. The hashtag WaiterV's Wall Street shot to the top of trending. People buzzed. A waiter taking on one of the biggest financial giants. This feels like a real-life movie. Major financial outlets quickly changed tone. Instead of grilling Ethan, They began questioning Davenport. Has the firm been concealing hundreds of millions in laundered money? Some experts even went live on TV, gravely declaring, if Campbell Capital's evidence is real, this could be the scandal of the decade. Inside Davenport, panic spread. Emergency meetings were called, and a rushed press release branded Ethan's claims as false and malicious misrepresentations. But the more they denied, the more suspicion grew. Their stock price nosedived, plunging nearly 15% in a single day. At Campbell Capital's offices, employees fell silent as Ethan walked through the halls. The sneers of yesterday turned into stares, part curiosity, part reluctant respect. Whispers followed him. He actually did it. From waiter to the guy who made Davenport stumble. Richard watched the news on a massive screen in his private office. He turned to Ethan, lips curling into a half smile. See, Ethan? A waiter can shake the market. But don't get drunk on victory yet. Davenport is only wounded. And a wounded beast is always the most dangerous, Ethan nodded, eyes steady. Deep down, he knew. This wasn't the ending. It was the peak of the storm. 3 days later, just as Richard predicted, Davenport struck back hard. Morning TV buzzed with Davenport's polished commercials. A booming announcer's voice. Davenport & Co. Over 100 years of integrity and transparency. We will not allow our name to be tarnished by baseless accusations from an inexperienced individual. But the counterattack went beyond media. Their legal team flooded Campbell Capital with 3 separate threats of lawsuits for defamation and slander. Several longtime partners abruptly backed out of deals, citing a need for review. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the cascade of cancellation emails, his stomach churning. Marcus, the man with the red tie, strode past, smirking. See, kid? Crossing Davenport is like slitting your own throat. Sooner or later, Campbell will pin this whole mess on you. Ethan's fist tightened. Every taunt from Marcus cut deep, but it only fanned the flames inside him. That afternoon, Richard summoned Ethan to his office. On the desk lay a stack of fresh files. His expression was grave. Ethan, Davenport doesn't just want your reputation gone. They want Campbell in the mud, forcing me to bow. The question is, are you willing to go further? Ethan frowned. Further? Richard met his gaze, voice low and steel hard. Dig deeper. This time, not just fudged numbers. I want evidence that can't be denied. Something that will bring Davenport's entire house down. But once you step into this, there's no turning back. Are you ready? Ethan drew a long breath, chest tight with fear. But beneath it, resolve blazed hotter. If the storm was here, he wouldn't run. He nodded. I'm ready. Show me everything. Richard's lips curved into a dangerous, approving smile. The next 3 weeks were the most grueling of Ethan's life. He practically lived at the office, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, combing through every page and every figure. Guided by Richard, he traced the money trail and uncovered a tangled web of more than 10 shell companies spread across the Cayman Islands, Switzerland and Hong Kong. And then the final piece fell into place. Ethan discovered contracts between Davenport and a fake construction firm, where consulting fees worth hundreds of millions were funneled straight into the pockets of their top executives. This wasn't just fraud, it was raw corruption, backed by undeniable proof. On the day of revelation, Campbell Capital held its most massive press conference yet. Hundreds of reporters packed the hall, cameras streaming live across every financial network. This time, Richard and Ethan stood side by side. Richard opened simply, "Today, we're not just defending Campbell Capital. We're defending the integrity of the market." Then he gestured to Ethan. Heart pounding, Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady and loud. These documents prove that Davenport & Co. didn't just inflate profits, they built an entire network of shell companies to launder money and steal from investors. Page after page of contracts and bank statements lit up the giant screen. The evidence was irrefutable. Chaos erupted, reporters shouting, microphones clashing, social media exploding in real time. The very next day, Davenport's stock collapsed, the SEC launched an emergency investigation, and their top executives were summoned. Wall Street shook. Meanwhile, Ethan's name, the waiter-turned-analyst, blazed across magazine covers. They called him the Eye of Truth and the man who changed Wall Street. That night, standing alone at Campbell Capital's window, Ethan gazed out at the glowing city. He remembered the nights serving tables, The sneers, the ridicule, every step had led him here. Richard joined him, handing over a glass of whiskey with a smile. "Congratulations, Ethan. You went from a mocked waiter to the man who brought a financial giant to its knees. And trust me, this is only the beginning." Ethan raised his glass, eyes gleaming in the night. "Then let the game go on.